October 14th, 1944. Petropavlovsk, Kamchatsky, Soviet Union. 14:23 local time. Captain James Dalton stood on frozen tarmac that felt like concrete beneath his boots, watching his breath cloud in air cold enough to burn his lungs. -20°C. -4 Fahrenheit for a man from Minnesota who thought he understood winter. The wind hit from the northwest at 35 knots, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin like needles. He'd been flying fighters for 3 years. P-40S in training, P-47S on ferry runs. But this assignment made everything before feel like practice. 5,000 miles from home, about to hand over an aircraft to a Soviet pilot who spoke no English in a war that wasn't officially his country's fight anymore, but somehow still required American weapons delivered to the edge of the world. The P-63 King Cobra sat 20 yards away. Serial number 42-68941. Fresh from the Bell Aircraft Factory in Buffalo, New York, flown across a continent and an ocean to reach this desolate strip of frozen earth on the Kamchatka Peninsula. The massive cannon protruding from the nose spinner looked obscene. 37 millimeters, nearly 1.5 inches of bore diameter, the kind of weapon you mounted on a tank, not a fighter aircraft. Dalton knew the specs by heart now. Had to. Part of the ferry pilot's job was knowing what you were delivering well enough to teach someone else to fly it in 20 minutes. Allison Fiv 1710117 engine, 12 cylinders, liquid-cooled, 1,325 horsepower at 25,000 feet. Not the most powerful engine in the sky, but reliable. Proven. The Soviets liked proven. 37mm M4 cannon, 58 rounds of high-explosive ammunition. Each shell weighed over a pound. Each one carried enough explosive to turn sheet metal into confetti. Wingspan, 38 feet, 4 inches. Length, 32 feet, 8 inches. Maximum speed, 410 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. 390 at sea level. Combat radius, 450 miles with external tanks. Empty weight, 6,375 pounds. Maximum weight at takeoff, 10,500 pounds. A heavy aircraft by fighter standards. The Soviets called the P-39 Aerocobra heavy. This was heavier, but that cannon, that impossible, beautiful, terrible cannon. The Soviet pilot approached across the tarmac. Major Viktor Kozlov, 29 years old according to the manifest, though his eyes looked older. A scar ran down his left cheek from temple to jaw. Shrapnel, probably, or fire. The kind of wound that told stories the man would never speak aloud. Ice-blue eyes that had seen things Dalton couldn't imagine. 3 years fighting the Germans on the Eastern Front. A war of annihilation. Cities under siege for 900 days. Tank battles with 3,000 vehicles. Pilots ramming enemy bombers when they ran out of ammunition. Kozlov walked around the P-63 slowly, methodically, running his gloved hands along the aluminum skin like a man appraising a horse. Checking the landing gear struts, the propeller blades, the cowling seams, looking for damage from the flight, looking for weakness. He stopped at the nose, tapped the cannon barrel with one knuckle. The sound rang clear in the frozen air. Then he said something in Russian. 3 words. His tone suggested approval, but Dalton couldn't be sure. The interpreter materialized. Lieutenant from Vladivostok. Tired looking. Too many of these handovers. Too many American pilots and Soviet pilots trying to communicate across a language barrier that felt wider than the Bering Strait. Major Kozlov asks about ammunition, the interpreter said. His English carried a British accent, probably learned from BBC broadcasts. He wants to know how many rounds. 58, Dalton said. High explosive. The ammunition counter is on the left side of the instrument panel. I'll show him. The interpreter translated. Kozlov smiled. First time Dalton had seen the man's face change expression. It was the smile of a craftsman receiving a better tool, the smile of a man who'd just been handed an advantage he desperately needed. Kozlov gestured toward the cockpit. Dalton nodded. They climbed up together. Dalton squeezed behind the pilot seat in a space designed for ammunition boxes, not a 6-foot-tall ferry pilot. The cockpit smelled like new paint and hydraulic fluid and the particular scent of an aircraft that had never seen combat. Clean, innocent. That would change. The instrument panel had already been labeled in Cyrillic characters. Part of the Lend-Lease agreement. The Americans would deliver the aircraft. The Soviets would modify them to their specifications. Everyone pretended this was just commerce, just one ally helping another. Nobody mentioned that the Soviets had their own war to fight now, their own scores to settle. Dalton pointed at gauges. Switches, levers, Used hand signals and the few Russian words he'd picked up over the last 6 months of ferry runs. Oil pressure, fuel mixture, propeller pitch, manifold pressure, coolant temperature. The universal language of aviation, transcending the barriers of vocabulary. Kozlov nodded along, understanding through context, through similarity to the P-39 Cobra he'd been flying for 18 months. The P-63 was an evolution of that design. Same basic layout, same nose-mounted engine behind the pilot, same tricycle landing gear, but better in every measurable way. When Dalton showed him the ammunition counter, Kozlov's smile widened. 58 rounds, each one a guarantee, each one a promise delivered at 2,000 feet per second. The demonstration flight lasted 20 minutes. Dalton took off first in another P-63. Kozlov followed in close formation. The Soviet pilot's flying was aggressive, confident, no wasted movement. This was a man who'd survived because he was better than the people trying to kill him. At 8,000 feet, they went through basic maneuvers, rolls, loops, high-speed dives. The P-63 could do 390 miles per hour at sea level, 410 at 25,000 feet. Not the fastest fighter in the sky. The P-51 Mustang could do 440. The new P-47M could hit 470. But the King Cobra was stable as a rock and tough as a sledgehammer. Kozlov pushed it harder than Dalton expected. 7 Gs in a climbing turn that made Dalton's vision tunnel. The edges of his sight went grey. His body felt like it weighed 700 pounds. His arms like lead trying to hold onto the control column. These Soviet pilots flew like men who expected to die anyway. Might as well push the envelope until it tore. Might as well learn the aircraft's limits before combat forced the lesson. Dalton understood that philosophy now. Understood it in a way he hadn't when he started these ferry runs. The Soviets weren't flying for glory. They were flying for survival, their country, their families, their future. When your alternative is annihilation, you learn to push past fear, past pain, past the limits your body thinks it has. Back on the ground, Kozlov shook Dalton's hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. Through the interpreter, he said, "Americans built good planes but flew them like accountants. The Russians flew them like Cossacks." Dalton wanted to argue, wanted to defend American piloting, American tactics, American courage, but he knew it was probably true. The Americans had the luxury of fighting a war they could afford to lose, not in terms of resources or industrial capacity, but in terms of existential threat. If America lost the war, Americans would still exist, their country would still exist, diminished but alive. If the Soviets lost, there would be no Soviet Union. The Germans had made that clear from the beginning. This was a war of extermination. Total war. The kind that left no room for accounting. Dalton watched Kozlov taxi away toward the staging area, where dozens of other P-63's waited for their journey west, toward the German front, toward battles that would make the Pacific Theater look like a skirmish. He'd never see that pilot again. Never know if he survived the war. That was the nature of this operation. Deliver the planes, watch them disappear into the Soviet war machine, go back for more. In the mess hall that night, eating borscht and black bread with the other ferry pilots, Dalton heard stories from the Eastern Front that made his blood run cold. Tank battles with 3,000 vehicles, cities under siege for 900 days, pilots ramming enemy bombers when they ran out of ammunition, soldiers fighting with sharpened shovels when they ran out of bullets. The Russians weren't fighting the same war as the Americans. They were fighting for survival. 3 weeks later. November 4th, 1944. Nome, Alaska. Lieutenant Garrett Hayes had just landed after the worst flight of his life. Ice had built up on the wings so thick he could barely see past it. The de-icing boots failed 50 miles out, and he'd had to dive repeatedly to lower altitude, trading altitude for temperature, hoping the ice would melt before he hit the ocean. The P-63 handled like a drunk elephant with all that extra weight. Sluggish, unresponsive. Every control input delayed by half a second while the aircraft decided whether to obey. But it kept flying. That was the thing about these Bell fighters. They might not win beauty contests, but they'd get you home with half the tail shot off and an engine running on prayer. Hayes was 26, Montana-born, farm country. He'd learned to fly in a Piper Cub his uncle owned buzzing wheat fields and scaring cattle. Joined the Army Air Forces in 1942, thinking he'd be a fighter pilot. Turned out the Air Forces needed ferry pilots more than they needed one more P-38 jockey. So here he was, flying the Alaska-Siberia route, the most dangerous ferry route ever attempted, where more pilots died from weather than from enemy action. The weather briefing for the next leg to Siberia looked like something from a nightmare. A massive low-pressure system spinning up in the Bering Sea, winds gusting to 70 miles per hour, visibility down to 50 yards in blowing snow,
Waves 30 feet high. Water temperature 34 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 minutes to death if you went down in it. Normal pilots would wait. Normal operations would scrub the flight until conditions improved. But the Soviets needed these planes yesterday. Every day of delay meant Soviet pilots flying inferior aircraft against the Luftwaffe. Every day meant more Soviet pilots dying in machines that couldn't match German performance. Hayes knew this. Had met some of those Soviet pilots at the transfer points, seen the desperation in their eyes, the exhaustion, the determination. They'd lost so many comrades, were so tired of being outgunned by German fighters. The P-63 wasn't perfect, but it was better than what they had. Better meant lives saved. Better meant maybe winning this war. He took off at 4 o'clock, climbing through clouds so thick it felt like flying through cotton. The P-63's instruments were his only connection to reality. Altitude climbing through 3,000 feet, heading 285 degrees magnetic. Outside temperature minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. The controls felt sluggish. Early signs of icing despite the boots functioning this time. Hayes pushed the throttle forward, climbing faster, hoping to get above the weather. At 15,000 feet he broke through into brilliant sunshine. Below the cloud deck stretched to every horizon like an ocean of white foam, beautiful and deadly. Somewhere under those clouds was the Bering Strait, 60 miles of the most dangerous water on Earth. Navigation was by dead reckoning and radio beacon when you could find one. The Russians had set up beacon stations along the route, but they worked about half the time. When they did work, you still had to factor in wind drift magnetic variation near the pole and the fact that your compass started acting drunk this far north. Hayes had worked out his time and heading on the ground. Written it on his kneeboard in neat columns. Distance, ground speed, time, fuel consumption. If his calculations were right, he should hit the Siberian coast in 90 minutes. If they were wrong, he'd run out of fuel over the Arctic Ocean. The P-63 carried enough gas for about 800 miles. The route was 750, no margin for error. He'd done the math 3 times, checked it against the navigation charts, asked another ferry pilot to verify. The numbers worked, barely. Everything depended on the headwind forecast being accurate, on the fuel consumption estimates being correct, on nothing going wrong. Distance from Nome to Providenia Bay, 280 nautical miles. Fuel capacity, 140 gallons internal plus 75-gallon drop tank equals 215 gallons total. Consumption rate at cruise power, 65 gallons per hour. Flight time calculated 2 hours 10 minutes. Fuel required 141 gallons. Safety margin, 74 gallons equals 68 minutes of reserve. That was the plan. The perfect scenario. No weather, no headwinds, no problems. Reality started diverging from the plan 10 minutes into the flight. The headwind hit at 5,000 feet, 45 knots from the northwest, steady, unrelenting. Hayes watched his ground speed drop on the instrument panel, 210 miles per hour down to 165. The wind was stealing 50 miles per hour of forward progress, turning it into nothing, into wasted fuel. New flight time 2 hours 42 minutes. Fuel needed 176 gallons. Safety margin now 39 gallons. 36 minutes of reserve. Still safe, still within limits. But the buffer was shrinking. Then the ice came back. He felt it before he saw it. The aircraft getting heavier, sluggish. The control column requiring more pressure to maintain altitude. He looked out at the wings. Ice building along the leading edges. Thick, white, spreading backward toward the ailerons. The de-icing boots were working this time. Inflating, deflating, cracking some of the ice free. But not enough. Not fast enough. The ice was winning. Hayes did the math in his head. Ice accumulation estimated 400 pounds. 15% drag increase. Speed dropping from 165 miles per hour to 140. New flight time 3 hours. Fuel needed 195 gallons. Safety margin 20 gallons. 18 minutes of reserve. 18 minutes between making it and not making it. 18 minutes between landing in Siberia and ditching in the Arctic Ocean. 18 minutes of life. He pushed the throttle forward. More power, more fuel consumption, but maybe less time in the air. The math became circular. More power meant burning fuel faster, but getting there sooner. Less power meant burning fuel slower, but taking longer. There was an optimal point somewhere in the middle, but calculating it required more time than he had. Hayes flew on instinct, on feel, on 3 years of experience that told him when the numbers started lying and you had to trust your gut. An hour in the clouds below started breaking up. He could see water through the gaps, grey, angry, covered with whitecaps. No ships, no land. Nothing but ocean that would kill you in 3 minutes if you went down in it. The survival gear included a rubber raft. That was more psychological comfort than practical tool. Nobody survived ditching in the Bering Strait in November. The water temperature was 34 degrees. Your body would shut down before you could even inflate the raft. Hypothermia in minutes. Death in 5. The raft was there so pilots could pretend they had a chance. So they could fly the route without thinking too hard about what happened if the engine quit. The fuel gauge read half tanks when Hayes spotted the Siberian coast. Relief flooded through him like warm whiskey. The landscape below looked like Mars, all tundra and rock, not a tree for 1,000 miles. But it was land, solid ground where a man could survive if he had to bail out, where rescue was possible instead of certain death. He found the beacon at Providenia Bay, adjusted his heading for the final leg to Markovo. The weather was clearing, visibility improving to maybe 5 miles. He could see other P-63's ahead and behind, strung out along the route like beads on a string, everyone flying alone but together, each pilot in his aluminum cocoon burning dinosaurs to deliver democracy's arsenal to Stalin's air force. The landing at Markovo was rough. The runway was packed snow over permafrost, slicker than ice and about as forgiving as concrete. Hayes's P-63 slid sideways for 100 yards before the tires finally bit. Ground crew rushed out. Russians bundled in so many layers they looked like walking haystacks. They guided him to a revetment where his plane would be refueled and checked before a Soviet pilot flew it west. Hayes climbed out on legs that felt like jelly. He'd been flying for 4 hours in constant tension, every muscle clenched against turbulence and fear. His hands shook as he pulled off his gloves. Adrenaline crash. The body's response to sustained emergency finally ending. In the operations shack, a wood stove glowed red hot. Hayes stood as close as he could without catching fire. A Soviet captain brought him tea in a glass with a metal holder. The tea was strong enough to strip paint, sweet with enough sugar to make his teeth ache. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted. The captain's name was Dmitry Volkov, 29 years old. He'd been flying P-39's against the Germans, was transitioning to P-63's, wanted to know about the plane's quirks, its personality. Every aircraft had one. Hayes told him about the P-63's tendency to yaw left in a steep climb, the way the cannon recoil would throw off your aim if you fired in a turn. Small things. Details that could mean the difference between victory and a fiery death. Volkov nodded, filing it away. These details mattered. In combat, knowledge was survival. Every edge counted, every advantage exploited. The Germans were good. Better than good. They'd been fighting since 1939, had developed tactics that worked, had aircraft that matched or exceeded Allied performance in most categories. The only way to beat them was to be smarter, more aggressive, more willing to die if that's what it took. Through halting English and gestures, Volkov explained how the Soviets had been using P-39's, flying them at treetop level, using the nose cannon like a sniper rifle, getting close enough to smell German exhaust before firing. They'd turned a plane American pilots considered mediocre into one of the most successful fighters on the Eastern Front. It wasn't about the aircraft's design specs. It was about how you used it. The Americans built the weapon. The Soviets learned how to deploy it in ways Bell aircraft never intended. Volkov said the P-63 would be even better. The improved cannon had higher muzzle velocity, better accuracy at longer range. The aircraft climbed faster, dove faster, had better armor around the pilot and engine. It could take hits that would destroy a P-39 and keep flying. Most importantly, it could kill from distance. 400 yards with the 37mm cannon. Far enough that the enemy might not see you coming. Close enough that a skilled pilot wouldn't miss. Hayes asked what they planned to do with all these P-63's, where they were going. Volkov's expression changed, became careful. This was operational information, classified. But he was tired, and Hayes had just flown 4 hours through hell to deliver this aircraft. Some honesty felt deserved. East, Volkov said. One word, then more. Japanese. Soon. Hayes understood. The Soviets had signed a neutrality pact with Japan in 1941. But that pact wouldn't last forever. Stalin had promised Roosevelt and Churchill he'd enter the war against Japan once Germany was defeated. These P-63's weren't just for the European theatre. They were preparation for a new front, a new enemy. The Japanese flew Zeros, Mitsubishi, a 6M, light, agile, incredible range. In the hands of skilled pilots, they dominated Pacific skies for years. American pilots had learned hard lessons about trying to dogfight Zeros. You didn't turn with them. Couldn't. They'd get inside your turn radius every time. You use speed and altitude, hit and run, boom and zoom. The P-63 was perfect for that. Better climb rate than the P-39, better dive speed. And that cannon. One hit from a 37mm shell would tear a Zero in half. The Zero's light construction was its strength in maneuverability, but its fatal weakness in combat. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. It was built for offense, not survival. Volkov smiled when Hayes mentioned this. The smile said yes. The smile said, we know. The smile said the Japanese are going to learn what the Germans learned, that in modern war technology and tactics matter more than warrior spirit. Hayes stayed at Markovo for 6 hours, sleeping on a cot in the operations shack, eating thick stew that tasted like beef and potatoes and desperation. The Soviets fed their pilots well when they could, understood that men flying combat needed calories, needed strength, needed every advantage, including full stomachs. When he woke, another P-63 was waiting. He'd fly this one back to Alaska.
The Soviets would keep the one he'd delivered. The cycle would continue, ferry pilots flowing one direction, aircraft flowing the other, until either the war ended or the pilots ran out. Before he left, Volkov shook his hand, said something in Russian that sounded like gratitude. The interpreter translated. Captain Volkov says thank you for the good weapon. Says the Americans build well. Says they will use these aircraft to teach the enemy a lesson they need to learn.
Hayes asked what lesson. Volkov answered in English this time, slowly, carefully choosing words. That war changes. Old ways die. New ways win. Japanese still fight like 1941. We fight like 1945. They will learn or they will die. Hayes thought about that on the flight back to Alaska. About evolution. About adaptation. About how war drove technology faster than peace ever could. The aircraft he'd just delivered was already obsolete by some measures. The P-51 was better. The P-47 was better in some roles. Jet engines were coming. Everything was changing. But the P-63 had one thing those other aircraft didn't. That massive 37mm cannon. That one advantage. And in the hands of pilots who knew how to use it, one advantage was enough. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles away in the Kuril Islands, Lieutenant Kazuo Tanaka of the Imperial Japanese Navy was reading intelligence reports about new American fighters appearing in Soviet colors. Tanaka was 24, a veteran by Japanese standards in 1944. He'd been flying since 1940. Had survived 4 years of war when the average pilot life expectancy was measured in months. He'd shot down 17 enemy aircraft, 3 P-40 Warhawks, 2 F-4F Wildcats, 5 Chinese fighters, 7 Soviet Y-16S and I-153s at Khalkhin Gol in 1939. He flew the Mitsubishi A-6M50, the finest carrier fighter ever built in his opinion and the opinion of most Japanese pilots. Light at 4,136 pounds empty, powered by a Nakajima NK-1F Sake, 21 14-cylinder radial engine producing 1,130 horsepower. Maximum speed 351 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Climb rate 3,150 feet per minute. Armed with 2 Type 99 20mm cannons with 125 rounds per gun and 2 Type 97 7.7mm machine guns with 700 rounds per gun. The Zero could outturn anything the Americans built, could outclimb most fighters below 15,000 feet. Had enough range to escort bombers on missions the Americans thought impossible. In the hands of a skilled pilot, it was deadly. A sword forged from aluminum and skill and fighting spirit. The intelligence report said the P-63 King Cobra was similar to the P-39 Airacobra they'd faced before, but faster, better climb rate, heavier cannon. 37mm instead of the P-39's 37mm. Weight. Same caliber, but improved. Higher muzzle velocity, better accuracy. Tanaka wasn't particularly concerned. The Americans built fighters like they built cars. Heavy, powerful, no soul, no artistry. The Zero was different. The Zero was elegant, a masterpiece of engineering that prioritized what mattered. Speed, maneuverability, range. Everything else was excess weight. American fighters were tough, armored, could absorb tremendous punishment. But they turned like trucks. The Zero could dance around them, get on their tail, stay there, force them to run or die. The nose cannon on the P-63 might be bigger, but you still had to hit your target. Good luck doing that when a Zero was on your 6 pouring 20mm shells into your engine. Tanaka and his fellow pilots had a saying. The Americans build fighters like they build cars. Heavy, powerful, no soul. The Japanese build fighters like they build swords. Light, sharp, deadly and skilled hands. What Tanaka didn't know was that American and Soviet pilots had been sharing information about Japanese tactics for months. The Soviets had fought the Japanese at Khalkhin Gol in 1939, had learned hard lessons about the Zero's capabilities.
had developed tactics specifically to counter Japanese advantages. Never turn with a zero, ever. You'll lose every time. Use speed and altitude.
Slash through their formations, climb away before they can react. The P-63's nose cannon was perfect for this. One hit from a 37mm shell would delete a zero from existence. The Zero's light construction meant it couldn't survive what heavier fighters could shrug off. The Soviets knew this, had studied it, had trained for it. Major Viktor Antonov had been chosen to lead the first P-63 squadron that might face Japanese fighters. He'd survived 3 years fighting Germans.
Been shot down twice. Had burn scars covering 30% of his body. He'd transitioned from I-16 biplanes to P-39 Airacobras to now P-63 King Cobras. He immediately recognized the new plane's advantages. The P-63 climbed 2,000 feet per minute faster than the P-39. Crucial for energy tactics. The improved cannon had higher muzzle velocity, better accuracy at range. Most importantly, the P-63 had better armor around the pilot and engine. It could take hits that would destroy a P-39. From October 1944 through March 1945, Antonov trained his pilots relentlessly. They practiced deflection shooting at high angles, boom and zoom attacks from altitude advantage, coordinated slashing attacks from multiple directions. He hammered one rule into them: never get slow against Japanese fighters. Speed was life. The P-63 could outdive anything the Japanese had. Could zoom, climb away from trouble, use those advantages, forget everything about dogfighting.
This was assassination, not a duel. The first real test would come in April 1945. The Soviet Union, preparing to enter the war against Japan, had moved several P-63 squadrons to the Far East. Tensions were high along the Manchurian border. Both sides conducted reconnaissance flights that were really probing attacks, testing defenses, gathering intelligence, waiting for the war to officially begin. Antonov's squadron waited, trained, prepared. The pilots knew what was coming, had heard the stories about Japanese pilots, about their skill, their dedication, their willingness to die for the emperor. But Antonov had fought the Luftwaffe, had faced German aces who were just as skilled, just as dedicated, just as willing to die for their cause. He'd learned a lesson that most Japanese pilots hadn't learned yet, that in modern war individual skill mattered less than it used to. What mattered was tactics, technology, teamwork. The Germans had better aircraft than the Soviets for most of the war, but the Soviets had more aircraft, more pilots, more willingness to accept casualties if it meant eventual victory. The Japanese would learn the same lesson, or they would die not learning it. Antonov didn't hate the Japanese, didn't hate the Germans. Hate was a luxury for people who weren't trying to stay alive. He respected them as opponents, understood they were fighting for their countries just as he was fighting for his. But respect didn't mean mercy. Respect didn't mean hesitation. When the time came, he would kill them efficiently and without remorse. That was his job. That was what his country needed from him. The P-63 gave him the tool to do that job better than ever before. The 37mm cannon spoke a language every pilot understood, the language of physics, of high explosives, of certainty. One hit and you were done. No struggling back to base with a damaged aircraft. No emergency landing with half your controls shot away. Just instant transition from flying to falling, from alive to dead. Antonov had seen what the cannon could do in training. They'd set up old I-16 fighters as targets, obsolete aircraft scheduled for scrapping, fired the 37mm at them from various ranges. The results were spectacular and terrifying. At 400 yards, the high-explosive shells didn't just damage the target aircraft. They disintegrated them. Wings separated, fuselages split open, fuel tanks exploded. What had been an aircraft became a cloud of burning debris in less than 2 seconds. That was the future of air combat. Not graceful dogfights between skilled opponents, not duels of honor in the sky, just brutal mechanical destruction. Technology deployed by trained technicians against opponents who hadn't adapted fast enough. The Japanese were about to receive an education. Whether they survived, it was up to them. April 15th, 1945. 10:47 local time, near the Amur River, 15,000 feet. Lieutenant Kazuo Tanaka felt the cockpit of his A6M50 vibrate with the familiar rhythm of the Nakajima radial engine, 1,130 horses turning a 3-bladed propeller at 2,650 RPM. The sound had become like breathing, constant, reliable, a mechanical heartbeat he'd trusted for 4 years of war. He led a formation of 6 aircraft, 4 Zeros including his own, 2 Nakajima-Ki, 43 Hayabusa fighters. Mixed units were becoming common now. The Navy and Army Air Forces were learning to cooperate. Desperation made for strange alliances. The mission was simple: reconnaissance along the Soviet border, photograph troop movements, report aircraft activity. Avoid engagement unless necessary. The neutrality pact between Japan and the Soviet Union was fraying. Everyone knew it. Both sides probed, both sides tested, both sides prepared for the war that hadn't officially started but felt inevitable. Commander Hiroshi Watanabe led the formation. 35 years old, a veteran from the carrier battles of 1942. He'd survived Midway, survived the Solomon Islands, survived when most of his friends hadn't. Experience showed in how he flew. Smooth. Efficient. No wasted movement. The weather was clear. Visibility 15 miles. Temperature at altitude minus 15 degrees Celsius. Perfect flying conditions. The kind of day that made you forget war existed. Just blue sky and thin air and the horizon stretching forever. Tanaka checked his instruments. Fuel sufficient for 2 more hours. Ammunition full. 250 rounds of 20mm in the cannons.
1,400 rounds of 7.7mm in the machine guns. His Zero carried enough firepower to shred any bomber, any transport, most fighters if he could get position. He scanned the sky. Empty. Nothing but scattered clouds below and endless blue above. The Soviet border was 10 miles south. They were staying in international airspace. Technically. The definitions got fuzzy up here. National boundaries meant less when you could cross them at 250 miles per hour.
At 10:46:52, Tanaka saw them. 8 contacts, high, maybe 16,000 feet, coming out of the sun. American-built fighters. The distinctive profile of Bell aircraft. P-39's, probably. The Soviets had been flying those for 2 years. Tanaka had faced them before. Dangerous, but beatable. Heavy, not agile. If you could force them into a turning fight, the Zero would win every time. He keyed his radio. Bandits, 2 o'clock high, 8 aircraft, range 5 miles.
Watanabe's voice came back calm, professional.
Confirmed. Maintain formation. Prepare to engage on my mark. The Soviet aircraft were diving now, building speed, using their altitude advantage. This was standard Soviet tactics. They'd learned from the Germans. Energy fighting, boom and zoom, never get slow, never get trapped in a turning fight with more agile opponents. But Watanabe was experienced. As soon as the Soviets committed to their dive, he ordered a climbing turn. Force them to pull up. Force them to bleed energy. The Zero's phenomenal climb rate would give them the advantage. They'd turn inside the Soviet attack, get on their tails, end this quickly. The formation began the turn. Tanaka felt the G-forces build. 4 Gs, 5. His vision began to grey at the edges. He tensed his legs and core, forcing blood back to his brain. The Zero could handle it. Light airframe, strong wings, built for exactly this kind of maneuvering. At 10:47:00, the world exploded. Watanabe's wingman simply ceased to exist. 1 second there was an aircraft flying formation 50 feet to Tanaka's left. The next second there was an expanding orange-black fireball where the aircraft used to be. No transition, no damage sequence, just instantaneous transformation from machine to burning gas. Tanaka's brain struggled to process what his eyes had seen. Aircraft don't explode like that, not from cannon fire. Even 20mm hits took time to kill. You'd see smoke first, fire, the plane would start to fall, the pilot might bail out. There was a sequence, a progression. This was different. This was deletion. The fireball was still expanding when he saw the second Zero disintegrate. Not explode, disintegrate. The wings folded upward like a bird trying to clap. The fuselage broke in half behind the cockpit. Pieces flew in every direction. Metal, fabric, fuel, human. He was flying through debris now. Couldn't avoid it. Too close, too fast. Something hit his windscreen with a sound like a hammer on glass. A crack appeared, spider webbing across his vision. Liquid splashed across the outside. Fuel, burning fuel. The heat made the crack widen. Tanaka pulled hard right. Instinct, training, 8 Gs. His vision went fully grey. He couldn't see, could only feel. The stick in his hand, the rudder pedals, the harness cutting into his shoulders. His body weighing 8 times normal. His heart struggling to pump blood upward against the acceleration. When his vision cleared, he looked left. Commander Watanabe's aircraft was gone. Not there, just empty sky where his leader had been flying. He looked around frantically. The formation that had been 6 aircraft was now 3. Half the flight destroyed in less than 30 seconds. By what he hadn't seen the attackers fire, hadn't seen muzzle flashes or tracer rounds. Just aircraft exploding without warning. Then he understood. The Soviet fighters weren't P-39's. They were something new, something worse, and they weren't trying to dogfight. The remaining Japanese aircraft scattered, survival instinct overriding tactical discipline, every man for himself. Tanaka pushed his stick forward, diving. The Zero accelerated quickly. Light airframe meant good acceleration. He pushed it to 300 miles per hour. 320. 350. Past the red line on the airspeed indicator, the aircraft shook, buffeting, protesting. But it held together. He dove toward clouds at 8,000 feet. Sanctuary. If he could get into the clouds, the Soviets would have to follow visually. Maybe lose him. Maybe give him a chance. A shadow crossed above him. One of the Soviet fighters. Close enough to see details. The nose was wrong for a P-39. Longer, the cowling different. This was a new aircraft. Whatever it was, it had just killed 3 Japanese planes without taking damage, without even slowing down. The Soviet pilot didn't pursue into Tanaka's dive. Instead, the P-63 extended away, climbing, building altitude again, setting up for another attack on the remaining Japanese fighters. Tanaka made it to the clouds, stayed inside them for 10 minutes, turning randomly, no pattern, making himself impossible to track. When he emerged, the sky was empty. He was alone. Radio check. Dead air. No friendly voices. He tried calling each aircraft by name. Watanabe, Ono, Sato, Yamamoto. Silence. All gone. He turned east, back toward base. Fuel was now critical. The combat maneuvering had burned through his reserves. He had maybe 40 minutes, enough to make it home if he was careful. The flight back gave him time to think, time to replay what happened. He'd seen the Soviet fighters for 8 seconds before the attack began. That meant they'd seen him earlier, had positioned for the attack, had chosen their moment perfectly. The explosions had been unlike anything he'd experienced. 20mm cannon fire damaged aircraft, made them burn, made them fall. But this was different. This was instantaneous destruction. That meant bigger guns, much bigger. And the Soviet pilots hadn't even tried to dogfight. They'd slashed through the formation at maximum speed, fired, climbed away, refused to engage on Japanese terms. This was new tactics, new thinking. Everything the Japanese pilots had learned about air combat suddenly felt obsolete. Tanaka landed at 11:14, taxied to his revetment, shut down the engine, sat in the cockpit for 5 minutes before he could make himself move. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from understanding. They'd been fighting one kind of war. The Soviets were fighting a different kind. And there was no way to win the old war against opponents who'd already moved on to the new one.
The debriefing was brutal. Intelligence officers wanted details. What kind of aircraft? How many? What weapons? Tactics? Results? Tanaka told them everything. 8 Soviet fighters, new type, not P-39's, larger cannon, attacked from altitude, boom and zoom tactics, no attempt to dogfight. Result: 3 Japanese aircraft destroyed in 30 seconds, 3 escaped. No Soviet losses observed. He wrote in his report, enemy tactics entirely different from previous encounters.
Cannon effectiveness beyond our expectations. Recommend developing countermeasures immediately. The intelligence officer read it, frowned, asked if Tanaka was certain about the cannon size. Yes, certain. The explosions were too large for 20mm. Had to be larger. Maybe 37mm like the American P-39, but improved. Within a week, every Japanese unit along the Soviet border received the report. New American fighters in Soviet hands, improved performance. Heavier armament, aggressive tactics. Avoid engagement unless you have numerical superiority. But understanding the threat and countering it were different problems. The Soviets, meanwhile, were analyzing their own results. Major Viktor Antonov's squadron had just fought its first engagement against Japanese aircraft. The results exceeded expectations. Antonov had led 8 P-63's against 6 Japanese fighters. His plan had been textbook. Get altitude advantage, dive from the sun. Attack at maximum speed, fire once, climb away, reset, repeat if necessary. It hadn't been necessary. His first burst had caught a Zero at 350 yards, 3 rounds from the 37mm cannon. The first missed by 2 feet, went wide left. The second hit the Zero's left wing root. The third hit nothing because the Zero no longer existed as an aircraft. Antonov had seen the gun camera footage afterward, watched it frame by frame. The 37mm shell penetrated the wing root where the main spar attached to the fuselage, where 145 gallons of aviation gasoline sat in an unarmored fuel tank. The shell was designed to detonate after penetration. It detonated inside the fuel tank. The explosion was catastrophic. The fuel ignited at 3,500 degrees Celsius. The pressure inside the tank went from 14.7 pounds per square inch to over 200 psi in less than 1/100th of a second. The thin aluminum couldn't contain it. The tank exploded. The wing separated from the fuselage. The Zero, designed for minimal weight, had no structural redundancy. When the wing came off, the aircraft became debris. From shell impact to complete disintegration, 1.7 seconds. The pilot had no chance. The G-forces from the explosion knocked him unconscious instantly. Even if he'd stayed conscious, he couldn't have bailed out fast enough. The Zero tumbled, broke apart further, fell 13,000 feet, and hit the ground at terminal velocity. Antonov felt nothing watching the footage. No satisfaction, no remorse, just analytical interest. This was data. This was confirmation that the weapon worked as intended. The P-63's cannon turned enemy aircraft into wreckage, quickly, reliably, permanently. His pilots had fired a total of 42 rounds in the engagement. Destroyed 3 confirmed Japanese aircraft, damaged 2 others that might have made it home or might have crashed later. No P-63's hit, no damage sustained, perfect execution. The squadron gathered for debriefing. Antonov stood at the front of the room. 15 pilots, ages ranging from 23 to 34, all veterans, all survivors of the war against Germany. They'd earned the right to be here. Earned the right to fly the best equipment the Soviets could get. Analysis, Antonov said. No preamble, no congratulations, just business. Volkov, first kill, report. Senior Lieutenant Pavel Volkov stood, 27 years old, from Stalingrad, had fought in the siege, lost his entire family when the city burned, joined the Air Force in 1943, with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Target was Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, Army fighter. He was maneuvering when I engaged, jinking, making himself difficult to target. I used deflection shooting, 45 degrees, fired 3 rounds, first missed, second hit tail section, minor damage, third hit aft of cockpit, direct strike, aircraft disintegrated. Time from first shot to target destruction, 2.4 seconds. Antonov nodded. Good. Fedorov, second kill. Captain Boris Fedorov stood, 30 years old, had flown I-16 biplanes against the Germans in 1941, then Leg-3s, then Yak-9s, now P-63's. Each aircraft better than the last, each one giving him a slightly better chance to survive. Zero fighter, type not confirmed, pilot was skilled, began evasive maneuvers immediately. I fired at maximum deflection, computing gun sight calculated lead automatically, American innovation, very effective, single round struck engine cowling, penetrated, detonated inside engine block, catastrophic failure. The pilot bailed out, parachute deployed, he survived. Interesting. The aircraft with less armament allows the pilot to survive. The aircraft with the 37mm does not. This is worth remembering. We are not here to give the enemy a chance to fight again. We are here to remove them from the war permanently. The room was silent. The message was clear. This wasn't sport. This wasn't honor. This was extermination. Kill them so thoroughly they can't come back. No survivors meant no experienced pilots fighting tomorrow. Antonov continued the debriefing, analyzed what worked, what didn't. The tactics had been perfect. Altitude advantage, sun position, coordinated attack, maximum speed throughout. No one had gotten slow. No one had tried to turn with the Japanese fighters. They'd stuck to the plan. The Japanese will adapt, Antonov said. They are not stupid. They will develop countermeasures, new tactics, possibly new aircraft. We must continue to evolve faster than they do. The moment we become predictable, we lose our advantage. He pulled out a map, marked the engagement location. They will expect us to use the same approach vector. We won't. Next engagement will come from the east. Different altitude, different time of day. Never give them a pattern to predict. The pilots took notes, asked questions. How to improve deflection shooting against maneuvering targets. How to coordinate attacks when radio discipline was critical and the enemy might be listening. How to manage fuel during extended combat air patrols. Antonov had answers. He'd been doing this for 3 years, had learned every lesson the hard way, had survived by being smarter than the people trying to kill him. Now he was passing that knowledge forward, making sure his pilots didn't have to learn the same lessons through death. After the debriefing, he went to his quarters. A small room. Spartan, cot, desk, chair, nothing else. He sat at the desk and started writing a letter. Not an official report, a personal letter. To his wife, to Katya. He'd been writing these letters since 1942. Never sent them. Kept them in a box under his cot. If he died, maybe someone would find them. Send them to her. Let her know what he'd been thinking, what he'd felt. The parts he couldn't say and the censored letters that actually got mailed. The letter started with the date, April 15th, 1945. Then the facts. First engagement against Japanese aircraft, 3 confirmed kills, no losses, tactics successful. Then the truth. I am becoming very good at killing. This does not make me proud. It is simply fact. With the P-39, I had to get close, 200 meters, close enough to see their faces through the windscreen. Some looked afraid, some looked angry, some looked resigned. I remember their faces. With the P-63, I kill from 400 meters. I don't see their faces. Just aircraft exploding. This is easier for me. The same for them. Dead is dead whether you die knowing why or not. The Japanese are dying because they fly aircraft designed for the last war. They trust in fighting spirit. I trust in physics. Physics wins every time. He put down the pen, stared at the words. They sounded cold, mechanical, but they were true. War had stripped away the romance, the honor, the glory, left only mechanics, physics, mathematics. Applied correctly, they produced predictable results. The P-63 was mathematics incarnate. Mass times velocity equals energy. Energy plus explosive equals destruction. Destruction equals mission success. Simple, clean, brutal. The Japanese would learn, or they wouldn't. Either way, the outcome was determined, not by courage, not by skill, by industrial capacity, by technological advantage, by willingness to adapt faster than the enemy. Over the next 3 weeks, Antonov's squadron flew 14 more engagements. Not all were combat. Many were reconnaissance, showing the flag, reminding the Japanese that the Soviets could fly where they wanted, when they wanted, with aircraft that outperformed anything Japan had in the region. But 6 of those missions resulted in combat. Each time, the pattern repeated. Soviet P-63's held altitude advantage. Dove at maximum speed, fired the 37mm cannon, climbed away. Reset. Each time, Japanese aircraft exploded, disintegrated, fell burning from the sky. By early May, the kill ratio was 15 Japanese aircraft destroyed for 1 P-63 lost. The single Soviet loss came from ground fire during a strafing run, not from air-to-air combat. The Japanese fighters weren't getting close enough to threaten the P-63's. On May the 3rd, Captain Ichiro Yamada learned why. Yamada was 28 years old, 2,000 hours of flight time. He'd been flying since 1939. Had survived 6 years of war through a combination of skill, caution, and luck. He led a flight of 4 Zeros on a reconnaissance mission over Sakhalin. At 10:23, they were bounced by 6 P-63's from 12,000 feet above them. Yamada never saw the attackers until his wingman exploded. No warning, no radio call, just sudden violent expansion of aluminum and fuel and human tissue turning into an orange fireball. He looked up, saw 6 aircraft diving, American-built, Soviet-flown. Coming fast, too fast to evade, he slammed the stick left. Maximum deflection, 7 Gs, 8. His vision grayed. The Zero's wings groaned under the load but held. The P-63's didn't follow his turn. They extended away, climbing, using their speed to separate, setting up for another pass. Yamada understood the game now. They weren't trying to turn with him, weren't trying to dogfight. They were using the P-63 like a cavalry saber, slashing attacks from superior energy state. He couldn't force them to fight on his terms. They had all the advantages: altitude, speed, firepower. He ordered his remaining 3 aircraft to dive for the deck, get low, use terrain, make it harder for the P-63's to build speed for their attacks. It almost worked. The Zeros made it down to 500 feet, weaving between hills, using every terrain feature for cover, fast and agile at low altitude. This was where the Zero excelled. But Lieutenant Mikhail Sokolov, flying his P-63 like a man possessed, followed them down. 350 miles per hour, 50 feet off the ground, closing on Yamada's No. 3 aircraft. The Japanese pilot saw him coming, tried to brake, turn into the attack, force an overshoot, standard defensive maneuver. Should have worked. Sokolov didn't try to turn with him, fired at maximum deflection, walking his cannon shells across the Zero's flight path, calculated where the target would be, put rounds in that space, let physics do the rest. 1 shell was enough. Hit the Zero's left wing root. The wing separated from the fuselage. The aircraft immediately became unflyable, cartwheeled into a forest hillside, disappeared in a ball of fire and shredded pine trees. Yamada and his 2 remaining wingmen escaped by flying into a narrow valley. too narrow for the P-63's to follow safely. Too much risk of hitting a mountainside at 350 miles per hour. The Soviet pilots let them go. Mission accomplished. 2 kills, 1 probable. No losses. Yamada landed at 11:47. Fuel critical, hands shaking. He'd been in combat for 6 years, had faced Chinese pilots, American pilots, British pilots. This was different. This felt like being hunted by something that had evolved beyond your ability to resist. His report to headquarters was direct, factual, no embellishment. Enemy aircraft possesses cannon of unprecedented destructive power. Our fighters cannot survive even glancing hits. Tactics are designed to prevent engagement on our terms. Recommend avoiding combat unless we possess overwhelming numerical superiority. The report circulated through Japanese command structure. Generated discussion. Some officers refused to believe it, insisted that fighting spirit would overcome material disadvantage. That Japanese pilots properly motivated could defeat any enemy. Other officers, the ones who'd been fighting since 1941, knew better. They'd seen technological evolution in real time, had watched as American aircraft got better, faster, tougher, more heavily armed. The early war had been fought with P-40S and F-4F Wildcats. Now it was P-38s and F-6Fs and P-51s, each generation better than the last. The P-63 in Soviet hands was just another evolution, another step in the arms race. And Japan was falling behind. The Zero was still fundamentally a 1940 design, improved over the years but constrained by its original philosophy. Light, agile, long range, no armor, no protection. That philosophy had worked when Japanese pilots were the best trained in the world, when they had more experience than their opponents, when they could use superior skill to overcome material disadvantages. But by May 1945, the best Japanese pilots were dead. The training programs were rushed. New pilots went into combat with 200 hours of flight time instead of the 800 hours pre-war pilots received. They were brave. They were motivated. But they weren't skilled enough to overcome the technological gap. And the P-63's 37mm cannon didn't care about motivation, didn't care about fighting spirit, didn't care about Bushido or honor or any of the things Japanese military culture valued. It cared about physics. Shell velocity times mass times explosive yield equals target destruction. The equation was simple. The results, predictable. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was profound. Word spread quickly through squadrons about the new Soviet fighters, about the massive cannon, about aircraft exploding without warning, about entire formations wiped out in seconds. Pilots who'd been aggressive for years became cautious, tentative, started avoiding combat when possible, no longer confident their aircraft could survive even brief engagements. Lieutenant Takashi Nakamura, stationed at a base in North Korea, started keeping a diary. His entries from May and June 1945 documented the psychological collapse in real time. May 15th. Suzuki was hit today from at least 400 meters. I was flying beside him, saw the shell coming, black dot growing larger. It hit his cockpit directly. There was no Suzuki anymore, just red mist and falling metal. We used to mock the heavy American planes. Now we fear them. May 22nd. We don't laugh at American aircraft anymore. The Russians fly them like demons. Their cannon speaks death from distance we thought was safe. May 29th. Lost 3 today. Watanabe-san says we must fight with honor, but honor doesn't stop 37mm shells, I'm afraid. June 5th. Refused my mission today. Told them engine trouble. The commander was angry. I don't care. I want to live. June 12th. Half my squadron won't fly. They call the P-63 the coffin maker. We're not warriors anymore. We're targets. By late June, Japanese pilot refusal rates had increased 34% compared to 3 months earlier. Courts-martial were up. Desertions were up. Morale was collapsing. The Soviets noticed. Intelligence reports documented the change. Japanese formations were smaller, less aggressive, more likely to disengage at first contact. The hunter had become the hunted. Major Viktor Antonov read these reports with professional interest. No satisfaction, no triumph, just data. The enemy was adapting to their new reality, learning that the old ways didn't work anymore. Some would learn fast enough to survive. Most wouldn't. He continued training his pilots, refining tactics. The Japanese would try new approaches, had to. Desperation bred innovation. The Soviets needed to stay ahead of that innovation cycle. New drill defensive tactics if caught at low altitude. The P-63 was vulnerable in slow-speed turning fights. If a Zero got on your tail at low speed, you were in danger. Solution: don't get slow, ever.
If you had to defend, use vertical maneuvers. The P-63 had better power-to-weight ratio than the Zero above 15,000 feet. Use that advantage. New drill-coordinated attacks against numerically superior forces. The Japanese might mass aircraft. Try to overwhelm through numbers.
Solution: hit and run. Never commit to sustained engagement. Kill one. Break off. Reset. Repeat. New drill ammunition conservation. 58 rounds of 37mm meant 58 chances to kill. After that, you were down to machine guns. Not useless, but far less effective. Learn to kill with 1 or 2 rounds. Make every shot count. The pilots absorbed it, practiced it, improved incrementally. By July, the average rounds expended per kill had dropped from 8 to 6.5. They were getting better, more efficient, more deadly. The Japanese, meanwhile, were trying everything to counter the P-63 threat. They reinforced cockpit armor, added 180 pounds of steel plate. It reduced performance, made the Zero even slower. And it still couldn't stop a 37mm shell. The armor might deflect machine gun fire, might stop 20mm rounds. But the P-63's cannon punched through it like paper. They tried new formations, looser spacing to prevent multiple aircraft being hit in one attack. The P-63's simply picked them off one at a time. Loose formations meant less mutual support, less covering fire, easier targets. They tried gaining altitude advantage first, climbing to 25,000 feet before patrols. The P-63's climbed faster, got there first, were waiting when the Japanese arrived. They tried night interceptions, hoping darkness would negate the Soviet speed advantage. The Soviets added crude radar systems, hunted at night anyway. Nothing worked. Every countermeasure failed. Every new tactic proved inadequate. The technological and tactical gap was too wide, and it was getting wider. By early August 1945, Japanese command made a desperate decision. They would gather their remaining experienced pilots, their best aircraft, the Ki-84 Hayate fighters, Japan's most advanced fighter, fast, well-armed, better armored than the Zero, and they would attempt one all-out attack on Soviet bomber formations, not to win, just to prove they could still fight, to die with honor if dying was inevitable. The mission was scheduled for August 8th. 12 Ki-84 fighters, 12 of the best pilots left, against whatever the Soviets sent. The odds didn't matter, the outcome didn't matter, only the attempt mattered. Captain Yoshio Sasaki would lead them, 33 years old, 18 confirmed kills. 3,000 flight hours, one of the last true aces Japan had left. He knew it was likely a suicide mission, knew most of his pilots wouldn't come back, but someone had to try. Someone had to show the enemy that Japan still had warriors willing to fight. He didn't know that the Soviet escort for that bomber formation would be commanded by Major Viktor Antonov. Didn't know that Antonov had been training for exactly this scenario for 4 months. Didn't know that the P-63's waiting for them were flown by the most experienced Soviet pilots in the Far East. Didn't know that he was about to participate in an engagement that would prove once and for all that the age of the warrior was over. The age of the technician had begun. The hammer was about to speak, and the world would listen. August 8th, 1945. 7:15 local time. Major Viktor Antonov performed his pre-flight walk-around in the grey dawn light. P-63, King Cobra, serial number 42-69108, his aircraft. He'd flown this specific machine for 3 months. Knew its quirks, the way it pulled slightly left in a climb, the minor vibration at certain throttle settings, the stick force required for high G maneuvers. The engine had 247 hours since its last overhaul. Fresh top end at 200 hours. Runs smooth. Oil pressure steady. Coolant temperature normal. The 37mm cannon had fired 183 rounds in combat, well within service life. The barrel showed minimal wear. He checked the ammunition bay. 58 rounds loaded. High explosive M4 shells, each round precisely 1.34 pounds, each containing 6.2 ounces of Composition B explosive, enough to turn aircraft into debris. He'd proven that 41 times against German planes, 18 times against Japanese. Fuel load 140 gallons internal, 75-gallon drop tank under the fuselage. Total 215 gallons. Mission time calculated at 2 hours 20 minutes. Fuel consumption at cruise power 65 gallons per hour. That left 38 gallons reserve. 35 minutes of safety margin. Not much, but enough. The mission brief had been clear. 16 P-63's would escort 24 PE-2 bombers to a Japanese ammunition depot 140 miles into Manchuria. Intelligence reported the depot supplied 3 Japanese divisions. Destroying it would cripple their offensive capability for weeks. Expected opposition heavy. The Japanese knew the depot was a target, would defend it. How many fighters they'd send was unknown. Could be 6, could be 60, didn't matter. The mission would proceed regardless. Antonov's flight consisted of 4 P-63's. He led. His wingman was Senior Lieutenant Yuri Petrov, 25 years old, 43 missions, 12 confirmed kills, solid pilot, reliable. The second element was led by Captain Boris Orlov with Lieutenant Alexei Markov as his wingman, all experienced, all survivors. Major Pavel Gorkov commanded the overall escort force, 34 years old, triple ace, 67 confirmed kills against the Germans. He'd been flying fighters since 1941, had survived when 90% of his original squadron died, knew every trick, every tactic, every way to stay alive when the odds said you should be dead. Gorkov's briefing that morning had been characteristically direct. The Japanese are desperate. Expect them to try something unconventional, possibly a massed attack on the bombers ignoring the escorts. Our job is simple. Keep them away from the bombers. Kill as many as possible. Don't take unnecessary risks. Dead heroes don't fly tomorrow. At 7:15, Antonov climbed into his cockpit. Strapped in, 5-point harness. Tight enough to hurt. Had to be. 7G turns would throw you around without proper restraint. He'd seen pilots knocked unconscious hitting their heads on canopy frames. Not a mistake you made twice. Engine start. The Allison 51710 coughed, caught, settled into a rumbling idle, 12 cylinders firing in sequence, music to a fighter pilot, the sound of power, of capability, of survival. He ran through the checklist from memory. Instruments, controls, trim, fuel, hydraulics, everything nominal. Ready. The takeoff was smooth. 16 P-63's lifting off in pairs, climbing to assembly altitude, forming up, 4 flights of 4 aircraft, each flight separated by altitude and position, maximum coverage, minimum vulnerability. At 7:47, they dropped external tanks at 12,000 feet. The mission profile didn't require the extra range, better to drop them now. Reduce drag, improve maneuverability. The tanks fell away tumbling, spinning end over end until they vanished into clouds below. Fuel remaining 140 gallons. 2 hours, 9 minutes at cruise power. Enough for the mission plus 30 minutes reserve, cutting it close but acceptable. At 0812, the radar operator's voice crackled over the radio. Attention all aircraft, large formation detected, bearing southwest, range 15 miles, altitude 18,000 feet. 12 plus contacts, speed 280 knots, heading northeast. Antonov did the math instantly. 12 plus aircraft, probably fighters, moving to intercept. They were at 16,000 feet. The enemy had 2,000 feet advantage. Time to contact approximately 4 minutes 17 seconds. He keyed his radio. Gorkov to all flights. Enemy fighters inbound. We're going up. Firewall throttle. Maximum climb. We need altitude before they reach us. 16 throttles pushed forward simultaneously. 16 Allison engines roared to maximum power.
54 inches manifold pressure. 3,000 RPM. Every available horsepower converted to climb rate. The P-63 could climb at 2,850 feet per minute at full power. In 4 minutes, they could gain 11,400 feet. But they wouldn't get 4 minutes. The Japanese were already at altitude, already diving, already building speed.
Antonov watched his altimeter wind upward. 16,000, 16,500, 17,000. The enemy would reach 20,000 feet before beginning their attack dive. The Soviets would be at maybe 17,500, still 2,500 feet below, still disadvantaged. But the Japanese were climbing, burning fuel, losing speed. They'd reach altitude slow, vulnerable. That was the window. All flights, Antonov transmitted. Hit them during their climb. They'll be slow when they top out. Maximum deflection shots. Get 1 kill and extend. Don't commit to turning fights. Acknowledgements came back. Calm. Professional. These weren't rookies. These were men who'd done this before, who understood that surviving the next 5 minutes required perfect execution. At 18,000 feet, Antonov saw them. 12 contacts. Sharp against the morning sky. The profiles were wrong for zeros. These were bigger, heavier. Key 84 Hayate fighters, probably. Japan's best. Fast. Well-armed. Armored. Dangerous. The Japanese formation split into 2 groups. 6 aircraft attacking from 2 o'clock high. 6 from 10 o'clock high. Textbook pincer. Force the Soviets to defend against threats from multiple directions. Divide their attention. Create opportunities. Good tactics. Would have worked against most opponents. At 08:16:22, the Japanese executed their attack. Captain Yoshio Sasaki led the first group, 33 years old. 18 confirmed kills, 3,000 flight hours, one of Japan's last true aces. He'd seen the intelligence reports about P-63's, about the 37mm cannon, about Soviet tactics. He knew what he was facing, but knowing and surviving were different problems. His plan was aggressive. Ignore the P-63's initially, drive straight for the bombers, force the escorts to react. In the chaos, create killing opportunities. It was desperate, possibly suicidal. But doing nothing meant certain defeat. At least this gave them a chance. The 6 Ki-84s dove, loose line formation, spacing good, mutual support maintained. They were targeting specific P-63's, trying for quick kills. Destroy the escorts and the bombers became vulnerable. They succeeded initially. Lieutenant Alexei Markov took concentrated fire from Sasaki's wingman. 20mm cannon shells walked across his fuselage. 47 hits in 3 seconds. His right engine caught fire. Coolant sprayed across the windscreen. The aircraft became unflyable. Markov jettisoned the canopy, unstrapped, bailed out at 15,000 feet. Parachute deployed cleanly. He'd survive if he landed in friendly territory. 50-50 odds at best. Lieutenant Sergei Volkov wasn't as fortunate. Flying in Gorkov's flight, took a direct hit to the internal fuel tank. The self-sealing mechanism failed. Fuel ignited. The aircraft exploded. No parachute, no survival. Just instant transition from alive to dead. He was 26 years old, had a wife and infant daughter waiting in Leningrad. 2 P-63's down in the first 30 seconds. Then the Soviets responded. Instead of turning away, instead of running, instead of trying to evade, they turned into the attack. Hard, aggressive, accepting the fight the Japanese wanted, but not on Japanese terms. Antonov's order was simple. Rolling scissors. Maintain speed above 280. Don't get slow. Rolling scissors was a defensive maneuver, both aircraft trying to get behind the other. Normally the slower, more agile aircraft won, could turn inside, get position, force the opponent to overshoot or break off. But at high speed, physics changed. The Ki-84 was optimized for fighting at 220 miles per hour. Turn radius 980 feet. Turn rate 22 degrees per second. Pilot comfortable. Aircraft stable. This was where the Hayate excelled. The P-63 at 310 miles per hour had a turn radius of 2,100 feet. Much worse. Should lose every turning engagement. Except the P-63 pilots weren't staying horizontal. Every turn went vertical. Straight up. Trading airspeed for altitude. Slowing to 260 at the top of the climb. Then rolling over. Diving back down. Regaining speed to 310. The Ki-84 couldn't follow the vertical transitions. Didn't have the power-to-weight ratio. Would stall trying to match the maneuver. The result was chaos. 12 Japanese fighters and 14 Soviet fighters tangled in three-dimensional combat spread across 5,000 feet of altitude. Aircraft climbing, diving, rolling, turning, cannon fire stitching contrails across the sky. Antonov found himself engaged with Sasaki, the Japanese formation leader. Sasaki was good, very good, anticipating moves, forcing Antonov to defend, getting closer to firing position. At 200 yards, Sasaki had the shot. Perfect deflection. His 20mm cannons opened fire. Antonov saw the muzzle flashes, saw the tracers converging, pulled hard into the fire. 7 Gs. The rounds passed behind him, missing by feet. He rolled inverted, pulled through, snap shot as he passed Sasaki's position. 1 round from the 37mm. Fired more in hope than expectation. The shell missed by 6 inches, close enough that Sasaki felt the shockwave. Close enough to rattle the Japanese pilot. Sasaki broke hard left, disengaging, smart. He'd felt how close death had come. Wasn't interested in pressing luck. Elsewhere in the furball, Senior Lieutenant Pavel Volkov had locked onto a Ki-84 flown by Lieutenant Kenji Sato. 29 years old, good pilot, experienced. He was jinking, pulling random maneuvers, making himself a difficult target. But Volkov was patient. He'd been flying since 1942, had 43 missions in P-63's. 16 confirmed kills total. He'd learned to read patterns. Every pilot had them, unconscious rhythms in their flying. There. Sato favored pulling right after diving maneuvers. Preference. Habit. Weakness. Volkov fired a 3-round burst, maximum deflection, leading the target by what looked like an impossible amount. 45 degrees ahead, putting the shells where Sato would be instead of where he was. The first shell missed. Anticipated. The second clipped the tail section. Minor damage. Lucky hit. The third entered the fuselage just behind the cockpit. Direct strike. The explosion was contained within the airframe for a fraction of a second. Then the overpressure found the path of least resistance. The fuselage skins split along rivet lines. Oxygen bottles inside ruptured. Secondary detonation. The aircraft broke apart structurally. Sato felt the impact, felt his harness snap from the forces, was ejected from the disintegrating aircraft at 8,000 feet.
Pulled his parachute, survived, would spend the rest of the war as a prisoner. Below him, pieces of his Ki-84 scattered across 2 square miles of Manchurian forest. Captain Sasaki watched it happen, watched Sato's aircraft come apart in mid-air, not from fire, from structural failure, from explosive force the airframe couldn't contain. This was the 37mm cannon's work. This was what made the P-63 different from every other fighter he'd faced. He checked his fuel. 47 gallons remaining. Ammunition status, 40 rounds of 20mm left in the cannons, 200 rounds in the machine guns. He looked around the battlefield, started counting parachutes. Japanese parachutes, 7 of them, floating down slowly. 7 pilots lost, from 12 aircraft. Soviet parachutes 2, both from the initial attack before the Soviets responded. The remaining P-63's were regrouping, forming up for another coordinated attack.
They'd lost 2 aircraft, but they still had numerical superiority. 14 versus 5. The math was brutal. Sasaki made the decision in 1.3 seconds. All units, disengage, dive for home, now. He rolled inverted, pulled through into a split S, diving away at maximum speed. The remaining 4 Ki-84s followed. Running. Survival instinct overriding pride. Better to live and fight another day than die for nothing right now. The P-63's didn't pursue. Their mission was escorting bombers, not chasing fleeing fighters. They'd accomplished their objective, broken the Japanese attack, destroyed 7 enemy fighters, kept the bombers safe. The P-2s continued to their target unmolested, dropped their bombs, destroyed the ammunition depot. Secondary explosions continued for 40 minutes. The mission was a complete success. Antonov landed at 0942, shut down the engine, sat in the cockpit for a moment, breathing, thinking, processing. His crew chief sergeant Grigory Petrov approached the aircraft, began his post-flight inspection, stopped, stared, started counting. "Major, you have holes." Antonov climbed out, walked around the aircraft. 43 bullet holes, 17 in the wings, 19 in the fuselage, 7 in the tail section, 12.7mm rounds from Ki-84 machine guns. They'd penetrated the aluminum skin, passed through empty space, exited the other side, caused no critical damage. The armor had worked. The self-sealing fuel tanks had worked. The redundant control systems had worked. The American engineers who designed this aircraft had understood that fighters needed to survive being hit, had built-in redundancy, protection, resilience. A 0 hit by 43 rounds would be aluminum confetti raining from the sky. A P-39 would have engine fires and control failures. The P-63 just had holes that could be patched in 90 minutes. Sergeant Petrov shook his head. "Boss, 43 hits and you flew it home. This is not an aircraft. This is a tank with wings." Antonov smiled slightly. "And that's why we're winning." The debriefing took 2 hours. Every pilot gave detailed reports. Gorkov compiled statistics, analyzed performance, identified lessons, results. 12 Japanese Ki-84 fighters engaged. 7 confirmed destroyed, 2 probable, 3 escaped. Soviet losses, 2 P-63's, 1 pilot killed, 1 pilot recovered safely. Ammunition expenditure, average 6.2 rounds per confirmed kill. Fuel consumption within planned parameters. No aircraft damaged beyond repair capability. Assessment tactics, successful. Japanese attempted coordinated attack. Achieved initial surprise. Destroyed 2 aircraft. Soviet response prevented further losses. High-speed vertical maneuvering neutralized Japanese agility advantage. 37mm cannon proved decisive in all engagement outcomes. Recommendation: continue. Current tactics: emphasize vertical maneuvers in turning fights. Maintain speed discipline. Trust the aircraft's survivability. Gorkov read the report to the assembled pilots, then added his personal observation. "The Japanese fought well today. They're brave, skilled. Their aircraft are good, but they're still fighting 1941's war. We're fighting 1945's war. Technology has evolved. Tactics have evolved. They haven't evolved fast enough. That's why they lost 7 aircraft today. That's why they'll keep losing." He paused, looked at each pilot individually. "Don't get overconfident. The Japanese are learning. They'll adapt, develop new tactics. But as long as we adapt faster, As long as we maintain technological advantage, as long as we refuse to fight on their terms, we'll win. Remember that. Speed is life. Altitude is life. The cannon is certainty. Everything else is details. The pilots dispersed. Antonov returned to his quarters, the small Spartan room, sat at his desk, pulled out the letter he'd started writing 3 days ago, added today's date, described the engagement clinically, facts, numbers, results, then allowed himself honesty. Today, I watched 7 men die. Some died knowing it. Others died without warning. I feel nothing about this. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just tired. Sasaki escaped. I'm glad. Good pilots deserve to survive. Maybe we'll meet after the war. Discuss what happened. Understand that neither of us were heroes or villains, just men doing jobs, using the tools we were given, trying to survive. He put the letter in the box under his cot. Someday Katya would read these, understand what he couldn't say in the censored letters. August 9th, 1945. The day after Sasaki's failed attack. Captain Hiroshi Sato led 6 Zeros on patrol, 30 years old, 3,000 flight hours, one of the most experienced Japanese pilots still alive. He'd heard about yesterday's disaster. 7 key 84s lost. The best fighters Japan had, the best pilots, all gone. At 11:23 he saw 8 P-63's climbing toward his formation. They had altitude advantage, 3,000 feet above the Zeros, coming from the southwest, sun behind them. Sato ordered his formation to turn northwest, toward clouds, standard evasion, don't engage unless advantage is yours. The P-63's rolled into their attack dive. Sato watched them come, counting seconds. When they got close, he'd pull vertical, force them up, bleed their speed. The lead P-63 opened fire at 400 yards. Lieutenant Hideaki Ono's Zero flying Sato's left wing took the hit. The aircraft didn't burn or fall gracefully. It simply came apart. Wings folded, fuselage separated. The pieces tumbled independently toward Earth. Sato flew through the debris field, couldn't avoid it. Metal fragments rattled off his wings. His windscreen cracked. Something wet splashed across the glass. He pulled hard right. 7 Gs. Vision graying. Get away. Get distance. Survive. When his vision cleared, another Zero was falling. Tail section missing. Clean separation. The pilot visible in the cockpit as the aircraft spun, looking at Sato as he fell. Eyes wide. No expression. Just watching. 6 aircraft had begun this patrol. 4 remained. 2 lost in 30 seconds. The P-63's were climbing away, setting up for another pass. Sato had options. Could fight, could scatter, could run. He chose survival, ordered the formation to split. Every man for himself. Meet at base if you make it. 4 Zeros dove in different directions. Maximum speed, pushing limits. 3 made it home. The 4th was caught by a P-63 during escape. Tried everything. Died anyway. Single cannon shot. The Zero fell burning. Sato landed at 12:34. Climbed out, legs shaking, hands trembling. His commanding officer, Colonel Watanabe, demanded a report. What happened? How many enemy tactics? Results? Sato told him everything. Told the truth. That they couldn't fight these new Soviet fighters with current tactics or aircraft. That the technological gap was too wide. That sending pilots up in Zeros against P-63's was murder, not combat. Watanabe's face reddened. Accused Sato of cowardice, of defeatism. Sato, exhausted, replied that the colonel was welcome to lead the next patrol himself. See firsthand what they faced. Watanabe threatened court-martial. Sato said, go ahead. Didn't matter. He wouldn't fly combat again, wouldn't send men to die for no purpose. The argument ended when news arrived. Japan had received the Soviet declaration of war, effective immediately. The Neutrality Pact was over. The Soviets were moving 3 armies into Manchuria, hundreds of aircraft crossing the border. Watanabe forgot about court-martialing Sato, had bigger problems. Sato never flew combat again. The war ended 6 days later. Of his squadron's original 36 pilots, 7 survived. He'd live with that knowledge forever. Why him? Why not the others? No answer. Just luck. August 14th, 1945. 1 day before Japan's surrender. Lieutenant Junior Grade Masao Kobayashi flew his 10th combat mission. 21 years old. 240 flight hours. Fresh from training. He'd joined thinking he'd be part of Japan's victory. By August 1945 he knew better. But orders were orders. 20 aircraft took off that morning, mixed formation, Zeros, Ki 84s, Kai 43's. The veteran leaders were dead or refused to fly. The formation was led by another rookie. The mission attacks Soviet ground forces advancing through Korea. Close air support. Standard. Except everyone knew Soviet fighters would intercept. At 10:31, ground observers reported the formation to Soviet command. Major Pavel Gorkov scrambled 16 P-63's. At 10:47, the engagement began. Kobayashi was number 3 in the second flight. When he saw the P-63's, they were already attacking. Ito's aircraft was there. Then it wasn't. Replaced by expanding flame. Orange-black. Growing. He flew through debris. Couldn't avoid it. Too close. Metal bounced off his wings. Windscreen cracked. Burning fuel splashed his cowling. Smoked, but didn't ignite. He pulled right. 7 Gs. Vision grade. Recovered. Looked around. Started with 20. Now 13 visible. 7 gone in 30 seconds. Radio chaos. Screaming. The formation leader tried to give orders. Voice breaking. Then explosion sound. Transmission cut. Silence. 14 became 12. Kobayashi dove. Get low. Wrong decision, but instinct didn't care. Shadow crossed above. P-63. Following. 50 feet off ground. 350 miles per hour. Chasing. He jinked. Left, right, up, down. Every evasive maneuver. Nothing worked. The P-63 just followed. Waiting. Muzzle flash. Single shot. Sound like tearing metal. The shell passed close. He heard it over his engine. Felt the pressure wave. Smelled cordite in his cockpit. That close. Left another Zero fell. Tail gone. Clean cut. The aircraft tumbled into trees. Fireball. Alone now. No wingmen. No formation. Just him and P-63's. Clouds ahead. 2,000 feet. He climbed. Full throttle. 40 degrees pitch. The Zero climbed beautifully. Into clouds 10:48:17. Stayed inside. Turned randomly. No pattern. Heard engine sound. P-63. In the clouds with him. Both blind. He turned hard right. Descended. Leveled. Throttle idle. Be quiet. Listen. The P-63 sound faded. Going away. Waited 5 minutes. Emerged. Sky empty. Radio dead. Fuel 23 gallons. Enough for home. Flew east. Low. Fast. Landed 11:14. Climbed out. Legs wouldn't support him. Sat on wing. Debriefing. 20 departed. 6 returned. 14 lost. Of 6 survivors, 4 never fired. Just ran. Kobayashi included. When asked why no fight, he said, "Fight what P-63 isn't a fighter. It's flying artillery. You don't dogfight artillery. You just try not to die." The war ended the next day, August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. But fighting continued in isolated areas. News travelled slowly. August 20th, 5 days after surrender, Captain Vladimir Markov shot down a Kai-43 attacking a Soviet transport. Single 37mm shell removed the entire engine. Pilot Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe bailed. Was captured. Insisted he'd never received orders to stop fighting. Final statistics: 542 kills versus 87 losses. Kill ratio 6.2 to 1. But numbers didn't tell everything. The psychological impact. The complete shift in air superiority. The fear. These were the P-63's true victories. Antonov's final record: 247 missions, 59 kills, 0 losses, survived war, promoted lieutenant colonel, became instructor. Of 47 pilots he trained, 39 survived, 8 killed. Average kills per pilot 7.3. Survival rate 83%. Unheard of in air combat. Japanese costs were brutal. Original pilots in Manchuria, Korea, April 1945, 340. Killed 187. Missing 41. Survived 112. Of survivors, 67 never flew again. 28 became civil pilots. 17 committed suicide within 5 years. 0 became military pilots. Japan was demilitarized. 30 years later. 1975. Aviation Conference, Tokyo. 3 men met. Saburo Sakai, Japanese ace, 64 kills, age 62. Viktor Antonov, retired Soviet colonel, 59 kills, age 61. Yoshio Sasaki, survived August 8th, 18 kills, age 63. They spoke through interpreters, shared memories, found common ground in survival. Sakai said, "I fought Americans in Pacific, P-38, S, F-6, FS, F-4, US. All dangerous, but always could fight back, could maneuver, could hope. Your P-63 was different. You turned air combat into something else. We tried to make it personal. You made it mechanical. Antonov nodded. Not mechanical. Physical. Physics doesn't negotiate. 37mm shell at 2,000 feet per second with explosive payload. Zero's aluminum skin 2mm thick. Outcome predetermined by mathematics. Sasaki asked. When you shot down my men, did you feel anything? Antonov paused. Yes. Relief. Relief it was them dying, not me. Relief I'd see my wife again. Relief my son would have a father. Guilt. No. They'd kill me if positions reversed. Satisfaction. No. Satisfaction is for sport. War isn't sport. I felt tired. 247 missions, 59 men killed. Each one made me more tired. When war ended, I slept 16 hours. First time in 4 years without nightmares. Not nightmares of guilt. Nightmares of them killing me. They shook hands. Respect between former enemies. Understanding between survivors. Sakai added, We are not so different. I also felt relief each time I survived. Also felt tired. The difference was, you had better tools. That decided everything. 20 years later, 1995. Moscow. 50th anniversary. Last P-63 pilot reunion. 17 men, all remaining from hundreds. Major General Viktor Antonov stood, 81 years old. Roll call of absent. 211 combat deaths. 34 accident deaths. 186 died of age. 17 present. First toast. To fallen comrades. They gave everything. We remember. Second toast. To American workers who built these aircraft. Most never knew our names. We never forgot yours. Third toast. Antonov stood with difficulty. To P-63 King Cobra. America didn't want it. We did. Wasn't prettiest. Wasn't fastest. Wasn't most agile. But had one thing nothing else had. That cannon. 37mm M4. Stalin's hammer. The eraser. Spoke once. Enemy listened forever. In hands of pilot who understood energy and patience made P-63 deadliest fighter in our sky. Not best. Deadliest. Best wins dogfight. Deadliest prevents dogfight by killing before it begins. Didn't need best. Needed flying cannon. Americans gave flying cannon. Used it to end Japanese air power. To the 37mm. Spoke language everyone understood. Language of physics. Language of certainty. Glasses raised. Drunk in silence. Outside restored P-63 Serial 4 2-69108. Antonov's aircraft. 43 bullet hole patches visible, kept as history, as testament. Plaque, P-63 King Cobra, rejected by USA, accepted by USSR, 542 victories, the hammer speaks once. Where they went after Viktor Antonov, died 1998, age 84, married 61 years, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. Never wrote memoir. Did my job, that's all. Refused interviews until 1975. Last words to grandson. Technology changes. Human nature doesn't. Always be on right side of technology. James Dalton. 247 Alaska-Siberia deliveries. 0 combat missions. 3 Arctic emergencies. Commercial pilot, Minnesota. Died 1987, age 75. Delivered mail. Expensive fast mail. Garrett Hayes, 198 deliveries, survived, aeronautical engineer. Helped design F-86, died 2001, age 82. Every design after I thought, would this survive what P-63 survived? That was my standard. Viktor Kozlov. Survived war as training officer. Never flew combat against Japanese. Trained over 300 Soviet pilots on P-63. Died 1989, age 74. I delivered the weapon. Others used it. Both jobs mattered. Kazuo Tanaka, shot down April 15th. POW until 1946. Civil pilot, Japan. Died 1993, age 72. Once told son, courage without technology is suicide. Yoshio Sasaki, survived August 8th. Refused to fly after. Teacher post-war, died 2004, age 92. Diary published 2005. Excerpt, August 8, 1945. Lost 8 men. Not to better pilots, to better aircraft. I was best pilot in formation. Didn't matter. They had P-63's with 37mm. We had Key 84s with 20mm.
Lesson pride matters less than production. Japan had pride. America had factories.
We lost to factories. Takashi Nakamura survived by refusing missions. Court-martialed, but war ended before trial. Mechanic. Died 1989, age 66. Diary note. Words from coward who wanted to live. Better living coward than dead hero. I lived. Not sorry. Pavel Volkov. Survived war. 16 confirmed kills. Test pilot post-war. Died testing MiG, 1951, age 33. Remembered as pilot who shot down first Ki-43 with P-63. Mikhail Sokolov. Survived war. 14 confirmed kills.
Instructor like Antonov. Died 2003, age 83. Last words to grandson. Speed was life. I stayed fast. That's why I'm old. Masao Kobayashi. Escaped clouds, August 14th. POW 1946. Airline pilot. Flew 737s until 1994. Still alive. 2024, age 100. Interview 2019. Were you scared? Stupid question. Of course. 37mm cannon turned aircraft into debris in under 2 seconds. Math doesn't lie. Real question. How survived? Answer luck. Pure luck. Clouds appeared.
I hid. P-63 couldn't find me. Not skill, not courage. Luck. War is mostly luck. Maybe 20% skill. Rest luck. I was lucky. 14 friends weren't. Think about them every day. Final reflection. P-63. King Cobra. Fighter America, built but didn't want. Soviet hands, 2,421, delivered Alaska-Siberia route. 542 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 87 losses. But numbers don't tell complete story.
Real story. Technology changed war faster than doctrine could adapt. Japanese pilots, supremely skilled, flying lightweight, agile Zeros, faced Soviet pilots in armored American aircraft with massive cannons. Japanese relied on maneuverability. Soviets relied on energy and firepower. Maneuverability lost. Not because Japanese lacked courage or skill, because they lacked aircraft designed for 1945 war while flying aircraft designed for 1941 war. 4-year gap.
Difference between life and death. P-63 proved industrial capacity and technological adaptation matter more than warrior tradition. Harsh lesson, paid in blood by thousands of young pilots. Both sides. Survivors never forgot. The hammer spoke once. Once was enough. The lessons lived on. Soviet fighter doctrine for 4 decades traced to P-63 tactics. Energy fighting, boom and zoom, never engage on enemy terms, firepower over maneuverability. These principles shaped MiG-15 in Korea, MiG-21 in Vietnam, Su-27 in modern era. Americans learned too. P-63 they'd rejected became template for what they'd build next. F-86 Sabre, F-4 Phantom, F-15 Eagle. All emphasized speed, altitude, firepower. All rejected dogfighting philosophy dominating early war. Japanese learned too. Post-war Japan's self-defense force adopted entirely different principles. No more emphasis on agility and range at expense of protection. No more reliance on pilot skill over technology. Zero's philosophy died in Manchurian skies. What replaced it looked much more like P-63. By 1950, every major air force had absorbed the lesson. Age of warrior was over. Age of technician had begun. It began August 14th, 1945, when Kobayashi flew through debris and understood courage without technology was just another word for suicide. P-63, King Cobra, rejected by creators, embraced by those who needed it most, used to end an era and begin another. The hammer that spoke once but echoed forever. In the end, it wasn't about the aircraft. It was about what the aircraft represented. The future. The inevitable. The unstoppable march of technology over tradition. Those who adapted survived. Those who didn't became statistics. 3 final words from 3 men who lived it. Antonov, physics doesn't negotiate. Sasaki, we lost to factories. Kobayashi, war is mostly luck. Together they told the complete truth. Technology mattered. Production mattered. And survival was mostly chance. The hammer had spoken. The listening never stopped.